Thank you for checking out Value Driven Life. I'm your host, Coach Chris McMahon, and I'm pretty stoked. Today I'm sitting down and chatting with Dr. Adrian Chavez. So a little intro for him. He is a nutrition expert with a unique set of skills for making difficult topics easier to understand. And he has a lot of knowledge surrounding nutrition with a doctorate degree in nutrition and health promotion and a bachelor's and master's degree in exercise science. So he is someone who you can trust, and we're going to be talking quite a bit today about a couple of different topics. But I just want to say, hey, how you doing, Adrian?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. So I actually came across your page a while ago, and it's been really amazing. If you're not following Adrian on social media, you're missing out. His info will be in the little show notes below, so you can click there and check him out. But it's been pretty amazing to just see how fast your page has exploded in the last few months. I think when I started following you, had maybe like 10,000 followers. And it seems like in the last few months now, you're like over 20,000 people. And I'm really excited about that because the information that you share is just super helpful. And the thing for me that attracted me to your page is I'm type 1 diabetic. And initially some of the information that I saw there, you were working a lot with diabetics. You were kind of dispelling some myths surrounding maybe insulin resistance or continuous glucose monitors. And for me, that's just really empowering and helpful to hear, um, especially for me, because I think this is the chance for me to geek out and ask questions too. For me, one of the paths I went down in trying to be as healthy as I possibly could, because as someone with type 1 diabetes, I want to be here a long time. Um, and not have any complications or anything like
hmm
that. And one of the traps I kind of fell into was following the folks at Mastering Diabetes, which is a great resource for folks, but there is some fear that it can instill in folks. And that took me towards, I was already vegetarian, just for moral reasons at that point. And then I read their book, and then I started listening to their podcast. And basically, the concept is if you're not eating a plant based diet and you are eating animal products, you run the risk of increasing your insulin resistance, which increases the likelihood of you not being able to control your type 2 diabetes or type 1 diabetes. And that had me go full raw vegan, basically. And while my A1C was incredibly low, like super low,
Yeah.
and my cholesterol dropped down to be ridiculously low, I also dropped a ton of weight, and I'm already a lean person, and I did not need to be doing that. It affected my ability to recover between training sessions. My sleep got all funky, and it also created some not great relationship with food. Someone who's diabetic already has a complicated relationship with food. So I was wondering if maybe you can speak a little bit on that topic to start off with, because
Yeah.
it's a well-intended, there is good intention behind why someone would be creating something like this. But it's a little confusing for folks because it's like, oh no, so I have to avoid everything altogether if I want to be healthy necessarily, however we're
Yeah,
choosing to
definitely.
define health.
And this goes back to what happens in a lot of nutrition information that you find online and books. I mean, any source that you're going to get access to oftentimes is going to be riddled with what you experience, which is it's more belief systems than actual science. So they have a belief system and it's coming from a good place, like you said. They want to promote not eating animal foods and a vegan diet. So they take this belief system and package it in a way that is appealing to a specific audience. And this is what Game Changers did. This is what What the Health did. This is what a lot of books do. This is what How Not to Die by Dr. Michael Greger. This book does a really good job of this as well. Is they're promoting information that is really driving a belief system and instilling that belief system in others, but it's not actual balanced science. Like they're telling people that eating eggs is so dangerous and not talking about the benefits of the nutrients that you can get from eating whole eggs. And same thing with dairy, like they'll single in on dairy and prostate cancer, which is a real association. But the reality is that, dairy increases prostate cancer by a small percentage. And along with that, it's prostate cancer is not like one of the major causes of death. And it also reduces cardiovascular disease risk. So when we look at the actual totality of evidence, dairy's not something that people need to be afraid of. But when you present it from a belief system, like what they do with, like with people who just want to promote a certain diet, uh, they can make you really uptake that belief system for yourself to where now you believe that everything that's an animal food is going to kill you, and they make it seem much more dangerous than it actually is. And that's one of the things that really frustrates me about this nutrition space is that most people are promoting belief systems and leading people towards beliefs that are difficult to really understand and manage, because you believe this and you hear this and then you see someone else who goes like carnivore and has a perfect A1C as well, or goes, really low carb and their A1C is amazing as well, and their insulin sensitivity is great, and they can, depending on how they do it, if they're not doing high saturated fat, their LDL can be decent as well. And it's hard to like, if you're vegan and you see this, it's like what's going on. If you bought into some of these beliefs on one side, it makes it really difficult. And nutrition's a difficult topic. Like there's individual variation, but the reality is there's no certain diet that everyone has to do. And when people are promoting that, like in your example, type 1 diabetes, you can do well off a high carb diet. You can also do well on a low carb diet. Both of those can equally be true. And this is where nutrition gets really challenging, is understanding the nuances is much more difficult than someone saying, "Hey, this is what everyone has to do." It's easier from a consumer perspective. It's a lot easier for you to just take on a belief system than try to understand this topic. Like it's just, and so this is why those things become so popular. That's why all the major books are, medical medium. He gets you to believe that some spirits are telling him certain things. Mark Hyman gets you to believe that anything that's not quote unquote clean or organic is going to be harmful for you. And they're just instilling belief systems instead of teaching you to understand, like, okay, dairy is generally like not good or bad for health. When we look at the data, that's what it shows. Increases prostate cancer risk a little bit. Um, Also reduces cardiovascular disease risk a little bit. At the end of things, it provides nutrients, calcium, vitamin D sometimes, if it's fortified. You know, learning about dairy is a lot harder, in learning those nuances and understanding like the potential risks, potential benefits is a lot harder than adopting the belief system of when someone tells you dairy's bad, just avoid it. It's easier to make a decision that way. And so that's, from a consumer standpoint, we gravitate towards those messages that are so extreme, and they simplify uh, complex topics in a way that makes it very easy for us to make a decision. But we have to try to avoid that, because that's not how the world works. And things are going to be, um, there's more nuance to it, and it's going to be more helpful for you to understand the nuance and invest that time learning about nutrition, because you got to eat for the rest of your life. So most people are, we're going for these easy messages because they're easy, and they help us make a decision really quickly. But the reality is that they're, over time, you're just going to get more confused, because you're going to get exposed to other pieces of information that contradict with what you thought you knew. And it's this cycle of, I can't tell you how many people I know that have like been reading about nutrition, learning about nutrition, listening to podcasts for years, like 5, 7, 10 years, and they're so confused. Like they have no idea about most topics because they're taking in these extreme messages that are more marketing than anything else. It's not actual nutrition education. It's just it's marketing for a belief system or product. It's telling you that everyone has to eat liver and organ meats when they like I saw something about this earlier. Like someone said that this is nature's multivitamin in pregnant women if they just take liver they don't have to do anything else. Like this is gonna kill people. Like because you can have vitamin A toxicity from taking if you're trying to get your choline and folate needs met, you will have vitamin A toxicity and potentially harm your baby if you do that. But this person is trying to promote this ancestral like people weren't even eating liver back then at a high rate like this. There's nothing ancestral about this, but these people are trying to promote these belief systems to sell products, books, services, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with having a business, but it's the sleaziness of the marketing in not giving people full information, misleading people in certain ways because most people don't have a solid background in nutrition. So that's what I try to do my best of is, really teach in more depth. It's not as exciting or sexy. Like my account has grown. You mentioned my account has grown. It only grows when I post rebuttals to people's BS. Like that's what grows my account. My regular content, if I'm talking about magnesium or vitamin D or whatever, like if I'm just teaching about nutrition, most of the time that doesn't lead to any growth in my account. The thing that grows my account is showing somebody saying some BS and then explaining why it's not BS or why it is BS. And it's kind of sad, but that's the way that human nature kind of works. People are seeking more controversy and simple answers over like learning about this topic, which people need to really commit to doing, because we got to eat. Like I said earlier, you got to eat your whole life.
Yeah. Yeah. So you brought up so many interesting points here, Adrian. And the one that stands out for me in particular is this concept. You say we have to eat for life. And I don't think anyone can actually disagree with that. Like literally, maybe folks who are super into like intermittent fasting and multi-day fast, they'll say, no, you don't need to eat for life, but you do. It boils down to that. We really do. That's what we're designed to do. We eat, we use it for energy, all of these things. So the thing for me that I think happens for a lot of people, the folks I work with, the friends, family, is that we get so tied, or our identity, like you said, gets so tied into a belief system or a thing that if we suddenly stop doing this thing, then what happens? Like, oh no, like I'm a failure. Oh no, I'm not good enough. Oh no, my moral system is corrupt because I'm going against the thing I said, right? Because even for me, full transparency, I stopped eating meat for a while because I went on a trip. I ate a lot of meat on that trip. I came back, I didn't feel 100%. I was listening to a podcast where this author was talking about he stopped eating meat because he was like, well, if I can't kill it, I won't eat it. And he experienced that whole thing. And he was talking about like some animal. And I was looking at my puppy at the time and I was like, oh yeah, I probably couldn't do that. So that's literally what it was. But at the same time, then I was able to realize that I just didn't feel great only eating plants, avoiding all day. Like I just personally, I eventually, my body stopped feeling as well as it possibly could. So I guess for you, the question is, how does someone begin to separate themselves from this identity that they might wrap in it, right? Because you work with all different types of folks who are coming in, and the hope is that you wouldn't say, "Hey, you know what? That you're wrong for doing." No, it's like, how can we begin to have some room in here, some wiggle room, so that we can be at whatever that top health line might be that we're creating for ourselves.
Yeah, yeah. So when you talk about identity, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So let's say, for example, like my son's vegetarian. I don't think he's ever not going to be vegetarian. He's 8 years old. He decided at like, I think it was 3 or 4, that he wasn't going to eat meat anymore. It was like right after Thanksgiving. I'm pretty sure like I don't know if he was 3 or 4. It's been a while, but he was like, I just don't want to eat animals anymore. Like and I had explained it to him previously, like, you know, this is a turkey. Well, I think it was Thanksgiving that he could see that it looked like a turkey, and I think that's what imprinted into his mind was like, I don't want to eat these animals. So that's what I mean. He decided that a long time ago, and so for him, like, I that's fine. Like he can get by perfectly fine on that as long as he understands uh, his nutrient needs. I mean, it's helpful if you're going to exclude foods like that for moral reasons. It's helpful to have some understanding of nutrition. And I'm actually thinking about creating like a vegan course because I think this is really like a vegan vegetarian course, like just helping people understand like these are the nutrients that you're probably going to have lower levels of: zinc, iron, omega-3 fatty acids, like specifically. I mean, you can get them, but they're not in their active form, essentially. Preform vitamin A, like there's things that you could potentially be deficient in that lead to some of those, negative effects that you end up feeling over time. So, in his case, just educating and helping him understand how to meet his nutrient needs within that specific, decision that he's made is going to be the most important thing. But for someone who realizes like, and the first step is a realization, like, okay, maybe I'm in deep on a belief system that may not actually be based in reality, because that's what some of these things, like the carnivore diet, like this whole idea that like we evolutionarily were supposed to be eating ribeyes and butter, like that's nonsense. And there's so many, with Mark Hyman, he seems like a very likable, informative guy, but he goes in and says like dairy and sugar and will cause your hormones to go out of balance and stuff like that is just it's an exaggeration. He says 70% of cancers are caused by caused by food. That's a made up statistic, and a lot of people online are making things up because it's easy. If I get on a camera, and instead of reading papers and doing research, I just start making stuff up, and I can say it in a way that people will feel like makes sense. Like I can explain why someone should avoid pretty much anything, and come up with these crazy, justifications for it, like the stuff that Carnivore MD does, like the carnivore, these foods have anti-nutrients and they have defense chemicals that are going to harm your body. Like you can just make stuff up and say it online and people will believe it if you have some credentials behind your name and you can speak in a way that seems believable. If you say it with confidence, you say some long words that people don't understand, and it makes sense, like you can make people believe anything online. And that's what's so frustrating sometimes is you have to find people who are willing to who are presenting their evidence for the topics that they're speaking about, and also doing it with in an unbiased way. They're not like promoting a very specific diet or protocol, because if they are, they're only going to present evidence that's in favor of that diet or protocol. If you follow someone who's, their name is Keto Dave, and even if they have a PhD in nutrition, if their name is Keto Dave, and all they talk about is a keto diet, you can be absolutely sure that the information that they provide is going to be highly biased towards a ketogenic diet. So if you find that you're following people or you're into like a some of these are like cults, like where they're they just demonize everything that's not what they do. Um, you really have to just find balanced sources of information. My social media would definitely help, and I share other individuals who do a good job of pointing out some of these uh, some of these ways that people mislead other people online. Like you have to understand that most of what you're seeing when it comes to nutrition is not education; it's simply marketing, and you have to get away from those. And it's hard because it all seems believable. Like the vegan stuff that you mentioned, like there's a bunch of MDs who do this. MDs don't have a background in nutrition, so this is why many of them will get caught up in these different diet tribes. And this is something that's important to understand. Like, you want to get your nutrition information from people who spent a lot of time studying nutrition, and that's almost never an MD. Almost never. Like, there are MDs who do spend the time and who understand nutrition, and they're not going to be the ones promoting carnivore diets or keto diets or any of that stuff. The ones that are promoting these extreme diets and not providing a balanced view, they had a couple of classes of nutrition. Like, an undergraduate student in nutrition in their first year would have more training in nutrition than most MDs have. And this is, people see MD credential, and then this person understands the body pretty well because they have, really, really in-depth physiological and anatomy training. And that's how this stuff can be so believable. But if you get your information from people who studied nutrition, who have a master's degree or higher in nutrition, um, it's gonna most likely be more accurate. Not always, but most likely be more accurate, than from any other source. And if that's where you're getting your information in terms of nutrition, that can be a game changer for helping you really understand this topic over, kind of being in these silos of information, of thinking that, this belief system is best.
I really can appreciate that. And I've talked about this a few times on the podcast, but for me, I'm an open book and I'm pretty honest with the fact that when I first got into the fitness industry, I kind of fell into it. I had no intention of doing any of this over a decade ago. It just wasn't what I was set out to do. And so the information that was put in front of me as a trainer, you know, was basically like, all right, avoid these foods, don't eat this food. This is good, this is bad. This is how you explain it to your clients. This is how they have to burn enough calories so that they lose their weight. This is how, it's very much black or white. And it's to no one's fault because that's really the place I was learning from was that was their job. They just needed to churn out as many trainers and do as many sessions as they possibly could. And, I'm very fortunate at this point in my career that I just know you have to read research and that if it's a black or white concept, it's really like you're missing the whole thing. No one exists on one end of the spectrum. Like it's a spectrum, all of it. And nutrition, it's a really young science and also it's a spectrum. Like that's the thing. And to help someone to have this understanding or to admit that you didn't always have this understanding is really important too. I think if someone comes out of the gate and they're like, "Yeah, I was born and I knew all of this." Like, you should really listen to me. Like, I've never been wrong in my life. Someone who does a good job of this is Lane Norton. He does a really nice job of like he myth busts and will call everyone out, but he'll also say, "Hey, I was wrong about this. Like the science is out here now. I can admit I was wrong about it, and I can respect that." So, Adrian, for you, like you definitely didn't know all of this forever. So, when was kind of like the light bulb moment for you where you were like, "Okay, maybe maybe I can go about this a little bit differently. Maybe I can like start to explain this." Like for me, it would be like seeing your social media is like that was probably a point when you were like, "No, I can definitely explain this a bit." But like, so for you, when did it become apparent that like, oh yeah, maybe this messy middle area, maybe this area needs a little bit more nuance behind it too?
Mhm. I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, I'm always reading research, so my I my understanding of certain things is refined on a regular basis because every couple of years max, I'm going to go back into the literature on dairy or soy or whatever the case may be, and kind of update, what's been published, and kind of update my understanding. But the real the time when this really happened to the greatest degree for me was when I started my PhD. So I thought I knew a lot because I read a lot of books. Like, I read hundreds of books on nutrition, during my bachelor's and master's in exercise science, and I started taking graduate nutrition courses Because during my master's degree is when I decided to just switch and go get a PhD in nutrition. I wanted to go get a PhD in exercise physiology because I wanted to work with athletes. I was thinking like exercise phys, biomechanics, that area. But I had some experiences that made me really more interested in nutrition. I just felt like there was more mystery behind it. Like exercise science is one thing, it's cool, but nutrition is just like the level of nuance and difficulty is on another plane, in my opinion. So I took a couple of graduate classes, and those were really hard. I had to read like textbooks to really understand a lot of what was going on because I didn't have a lot of the background. And then I got accepted into a PhD program for nutrition. And then uh, that was like a life changer because then you're around nothing but PhDs in nutrition, exercise science, and being in like a graduate level, doctorate program where everyone you're speaking with has expertise in various areas. They have master's degree in nutrition or higher. Some have like, actual experience working with people for years. That changed, completely accelerated my knowledge and understanding. And a PhD is, they basically, I mean, it's kind of purposeful. Like you go in there and they're like, you don't know anything, you need to learn. And they make you feel dumb. Like you feel dumb all the time. And you realize how little you know all the time because they think you know a lot about a topic. And then you hear a professor lecture on it who's been studying it for 25 years. And it's like, okay, I know nothing about this topic at all now. And I had, advisors and professors who were experts in cardiovascular disease and nutrition and insulin resistance and nutrition. So when you hear them lecture, you have conversations with them, they critique your work, that really takes it to a different level in terms of really understanding, like, I'm probably going to be wrong a lot. But by going back into the science and really understanding the overall body of literature in nutrition, having a good understanding of that, good understanding of like nutrient needs and all of the different classes you take for that, like micronutrient metabolism, micronutrient, like macro and micronutrient metabolism, and understanding how all this works, putting all that together, it really helped. But it, I don't recommend that for everyone. Getting a doctorate in nutrition is definitely something that it's just not advisable for most people. But that's for me, that's what really opened my eyes. And then number two, like I think I had another kind of major shift is when I just started working with people, and you see uh, so many different perspectives. Like I've worked with over 1,000 people at this point, in various, like I used to run a bunch of group programs, and you just see people who do well on certain things, people who don't do well on certain things. You understand like more of the application of it. Learning the science is one thing, and understanding what the research literature says is one thing, but actually translating that into information that people can take and use, and that's a whole different ball game. So I think in that sense, like I had my ideals of what how things should look based on the literature prior to that, but then when you actually get experience working with people, it helps to kind of shape um not a full science approach, but like kind of shape how to do things in a way that can be helpful. And it's funny because I get people in like, people will reach out to me because I do Q&As on my Instagram, and I answer a bunch of questions, and people, because I have a lot of scientists who follow me, they'll get like mad about some of my questions, or be like, they'll correct me on something, and they're like, well, this is not what the literature shows. And I know that they haven't worked with people like every time, because I'm like, I get that that isn't 100% in line with what the research literature shows, but it's also important for me to communicate in ways that is going to have a positive impact on people. And sometimes that's not going to line up exactly perfectly, and that's okay. And so that, working with people, help kind of bring a new perspective as well. So I think those two areas, like really getting into science really in depth, and then getting into actual, you know, just seeing so many different circumstances over the years. Like like I said, I've worked with over 1,000 people because I've run a bunch of group programs. So like I've just seen so so many things that work and what doesn't work, and communication styles and things like that.
I think that this is really something very important to highlight for folks listening right now is the two things that you just said. It's like I understand the science behind it. I understand the, I guess, quote unquote, like the petri dish version of it. But then what you have to understand is that any of these concepts, like it's not going to apply to every single person. Like it just doesn't work that way. And that's the really cool thing about what you're saying. And that's again why I would point someone in your direction before someone like, say, Keto Carl, because Keto Carl, like it might work. The reason why he might be so closely, or they might be so closely identifying with the specific diet is because it worked for them. But because it worked for them doesn't mean it works for you. And the reason why is because your life is completely different than their life. And you don't know what their blood work says. You don't know what the long-term effect of whatever you're doing is. And the research can show that. But again, everyone's going to be different. Everyone's body is going to break down things differently. Everyone's going to have this completely different interaction. So I really appreciate that, Adrian. And I think it's something that, if I use the fitness world as an example, it's kind of like if you have a brand new trainer and they go to a weekend certification and then they immediately start doing those practices on their clients and they've never done it to themselves or really tried it with one person that they trusted and watched it over time. That's something I saw a lot when I was working in gyms per se. And so it's just really it's really fantastic to hear you say that. Yeah, I've worked with a lot of people and I basically understand it. So the way to summarize that is like, yeah, when I'm talking to people, I'm talking to like the end user. I'm not trying to help doctors. I'm not trying to help PhDs. I'm trying to help the person that is my end user. And that's really, really important. Those are the people who are listening to this
Yeah,
podcast,
you have to, like, because there's a lot of people who do research and that's what they do, and a lot of those people follow me. They're really smart. I learn from them. Like those are people I learn from. But at the end of the day, like, because one thing that comes to mind is something I said the other day. Someone asked me about like hydration and whether they can get their hydration needs met from from other things besides water. And I said yes, but I recommend getting most of your hydration from water. And someone like reached out to me and sent me a bunch of studies, and they're like, "Hey, well, you can still be hydrated from other things." And I'm like, I get it, but I don't. I'm communicating to 20,000 people, or like in the Q&As, like 5,000 people read my answers, and I don't want to give the impression that just waking up and drinking Diet Coke all day is fine. Which there's probably not going to be a major health detriment of doing that, but from a behavior standpoint and from a health promotion standpoint, me encouraging water consumption, even though it may be perfectly fine to have all your liquid from coffee and Gatorade, me encouraging water consumption is purposeful. It's not because I think the literature says you only have to drink water. I just know that when people drink more water, they tend to, that it just tends to have positive effects. Some people who have chronic headaches do better when they drink more water and less caffeinated beverages. And like having to take all of that into consideration, if you just look at the literature and say, oh, well, you can be hydrated on anything, but also understanding that if I say that, who knows where that might be interpreted. And I know that promoting water consumption is going to lead to positive benefits. So
yeah.
that's where, trying to balance, the hard what the research literature says versus what I say is going to be taken in by a lot of people, and how is that going to impact their behaviors, and how is that going to impact their health. And it's a balance. It's a
Yeah,
difficult balance for sure.
it must be a difficult balance. I mean, I don't have nearly as many followers, and I still have the same thing where you say something if I do a Q&A, and you will get messages from people being like, "Well, but I don't, but I," the similar topic, and maybe we could talk a little bit about this, because it's a big one that comes up very often, the concept of, like, so we can look at it like the folks who are like, Dr. Mark Hyman would be in this category of, like, you have to eat clean, clean eating, regeneratively farmed, organic only. You're gonna mess up your body if you don't, right? It's basically like if someone asked me, do I have to eat organic food to be healthy? My answer now is you can if it makes you feel better about yourself. But the reality of it is no, you don't. And people get confused when I say that. You might be able to explain that better than I can because you've probably read the research behind it. I don't know if you feel comfortable talking about
Yeah,
that, but
yeah,
I
for
I
sure.
that's just my opinion on it, but I think folks would love to hear your opinion and the way you would explain it.
Yeah, so organic is not necessarily safer or healthier, and it's going to cost a lot more. So in some cases, depending on where you live, it could be 3, 4 times as much for the organic option. If the organic option looks great and the cost difference is minimal, then it makes sense sometimes to buy it. And I still buy some things organic, because of that reason. But generally speaking, I'm not going to pay 2 or 3 times as much for something that might have slightly lower pesticide residues. We already have lots of research on pesticide exposure. People try to scare you, but the reality is all of the studies that have ever been done showing benefits of fruits and vegetable consumption are done with non-organic produce when standards were even less than they are now. Like they were spraying more stuff on it, in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and we have more. That's all of the data we have on nutrition is, when people eat more broccoli, which is sprayed with pesticides, like it's a positive effect. And so there are benefits to eating non-organic produce, and we haven't shown any risks of that at this point, any major risks. There just seems to be a little bit more pesticide residue, but that's within a very safe limit. So that's, I think a lot of people need to understand that, because there's a lot of people who put themselves in a situation that they probably don't need to be putting themselves into financially, trying to purchase everything organic, thinking, well, it's an investment in my health, when the reality is you're paying, maybe 3 times as much for something that it is not much better. And a better investment might be, getting a hiring a coach, or getting, mental health counseling, or other things that you can spend that hundreds of dollars on, that many people are spending on feeling like they have to eat organic food, on other things that would be a better investment in your health. And again, this is just largely driven by a belief system overall, rather than actual science and data. And this is one of the areas where I used to think differently when I first heard about pesticides and organic, and I fell into some of these sources of information. I pretty much only bought organic for a while, and then I read the studies. This was, early 20s, and then I actually looked into it a little bit more, tried to understand it better, and I was like, I don't think there's really, and it took me a while to like fully transition away from organic. Like I started buying some non-organic things like when the cost difference was large, and I kind of moved away from that over time. But like I I read all the research I could, and I couldn't find any like great justification for why I needed to buy organic. Um in just understanding the marketing behind some of these things, like the Dirty Dozen, many people have heard of that, from the Environmental Working Group. That is, the Environmental Working Group is funded by organic food manufacturers. Like that, their goal is to scare you into buying more expensive products. Like that's what that whole organization is designed for, is to scare you away from the regular stuff on the grocery shelves, and make you feel like you have to buy these other options that cost 2 to 3 times as much. And it's a great investment for these organic food companies that just go in and fund the Environmental Working Group and say, because they put out stuff that all the influencers use to scare people as well, and it works. It's a good marketing system, but when you realize what it is, it's just a marketing. It's an agency that markets for organic food companies. That's what the environmental working group is. Same with like organic skincare and all that other stuff. Like they basically scare you away from the things that people have been using forever without having any negative side effects from, the products that are your parents use and your grandparents use that make you think that they're going to kill you, so that you can buy this other option that costs 3 to 4 times as much, and it's not any better oftentimes.
It's it's really rough because, even if someone does technically cite, let's say someone cites a research saying that someone the reduced risk of cancer for someone consuming something organic versus inorganic. And the reality of it is, well, yeah, usually those risks of cancers are increasing because of the demographic of people they're looking at. And if someone is in a lower income or economic troubled section, telling them that they have to spend more money on organic food when financially they're already troubled as it is, that's not going to provide someone the opportunity to have more fruits and vegetables, which basically, if we're having a more well-balanced diet, the rate or the likelihood of someone having a high risk of cancer would decrease. So it's this really like unnecessary, convoluted thing that prevents someone from actually being exposed to the things that would help them and don't need to break the bank for someone to be able to have. So I really appreciate you taking the time to explain that, because it's one of the most popular things I get asked about or have someone like butt heads with me about because you know, it's just easier to sprout some science or just I actually once received a DM from someone who is currently in school studying the very topic, and I was just like, yeah, but like literally where you're limiting someone from being able to have the thing they actually need by saying
Yeah, I
something
mean,
that
you
probably isn't
have
true.
you have to understand. And here's the thing: most influencers on social media, like they live in LA, like they have access to like, and they have, oftentimes they grew up in privileged environments, and they don't really understand that some people need to make decisions based on, whatever makes sense financially, and that isn't always buying organic. Like that will cost, like, imagine like a mother, with 3 kids and a family of 5. Like the difference from buying all organic versus not is substantial. Like that can, that's like 700-800 bucks a month probably in some cases, and that matters. Like that has to be taken into account. Is it worth $800 a month for someone to buy into that belief system? And it's a belief system. Again, it's just like earlier, like organic and natural, like these words make us feel good. And so when you hear organic, you think it's better. Like I can't tell you how many people I've had to like explain this to so many times, because it was hard. Like they just believe that organic was better, and that's, it. A lot of the messages on Instagram are very elitist. Like the nutrition messages are really coming from this place. Like I saw another, someone sent me this earlier where someone said, don't drink Ensure, which is like, one, sometimes they give it out at hospitals when someone, can't get their nutrition from other ways and they're trying to help them gain weight, they'll give them Ensure. It's not the most nutritious thing in the world, but this person said, don't drink this. Instead, have this. And the this was, so Ensure is like $1 per bottle. It's easy, it's accessible. Someone's gonna be able to, if you're disabled and in a hospital bed, that would be an easy source of nutrition. Or disabled and you can't get around too much, and that would be an easy source of getting in nutrition, vitamins and minerals and things like that. They recommended instead like this smoothie with like chia seeds and turmeric and flax, and like it had like 12 ingredients. It is something that, this is when I know people have never worked with anyone like, or like outside of LA maybe. Like some of these people, they work with people, but they're like in LA or New York or Miami, and they're only working with like, really people who have a lot more money to spend and have access to all this stuff. But like someone in Texas, like this is where I live, like it's hard to even find some of this stuff. Like it's hard to even find multiple of the ingredients that he listed. So if I went out and tried to do that, like it would cost me, I'd have to drive to multiple grocery stores. That's why they're giving insure to sick people, because oftentimes they don't have, they're fatigued, they're lacking mobility, like they're doing it for reasons beyond, this is the most nutritious thing. It's accessible and easy for people who are in health situations that may not allow them to make a blueberry smoothie with chia and flax and turmeric and lion's mane and all this other BS, that isn't necessarily providing them the nutrients that wouldn't provide, like the insurer is designed to provide. Like if you drink a couple of them a day, it's going to provide, like a multivitamin and multimineral. This $7 smoothie that he recommended instead wouldn't provide that, like those nutrients either. Like it just blows my mind that like the lack of perspective. Like there's a lot of people who probably don't have access to this stuff, don't have the money to be able to drink, to go and go to multiple stores, find these different ingredients, make them drink that to get their couple of hundred calories that they need extra per day because they're having a hard time with losing weight or something like that. Like just a lack of perspective. And this was an influencer. Someone sent this to me earlier. This is an influencer who has hundreds of thousands of followers who is saying stuff like this. And they always say stuff like this. And it just lacks so much perspective. Like giving people an alternative option that would be more accessible and affordable, that would make sense. But telling someone, and at the beginning he says, "Oh, this is going to kill you. It has all these inflammatory ingredients and blah blah blah," and like scares the crap out of someone who may be relying on that as a source of affordable, accessible nutrition for them, scares them into thinking now they have to go drive to 7 different stores to get different, get all the ingredients that he recommended, and spend an hour and a half in their day to make a smoothie, by driving. And I drink a smoothie every day. I recommend it. Like it's a great thing to do, but um making that seem like an alternative is just so detached from what people actually, like people's real life. Not everyone, like these people are sick, they're working 40 hours a week oftentimes, like they may be raising kids. Like not everyone's a entrepreneur with their own, control of their schedule, no budget, living in LA, without kids. Like that's
Yeah.
what most influencers are, like living in Southern California. They have access to all these different foods. They don't have kids. They don't have actual work. Like reality is different than and they're speaking to something that, or they're giving recommendations oftentimes that are just not doable for the average person. And it makes the average person, who, if you're watching that and you're like, oh my god, I can't live that life, and I can't eat like that because it's too expensive, I don't have access to it, don't have time, it makes you feel like you can't be healthy, and that's not healthy. That is, I call it like designer nutrition. That's like, you know, you don't have to do that to be healthy. You can eat regular non-organic fruits and vegetables at the store. You don't have to, you can have other things that aren't, what these people portray as like the ideal option, and still be healthy, still exercise on a regular basis, still meet your needs with nutrition. That doesn't have to cost you, doesn't have require you to triple your grocery budget or double your grocery budget in order to do that. um, but it's profitable. Like if I'm going to promote something online and build a business or build like a platform off of it, it's profitable for me to tell you, because this company will pay me, or and they'll give me like a link for affiliate link or whatever, to tell you that you have to, have this $7 organic plant milk over just drinking, milk that's actually going to provide probably more nutrients than the plant milk most times anyway, and cost one third the amount or one fourth the amount.
Oh, wow. I think that really will resonate with a lot of people who hear it. And Adrian, for folks who want to learn more or who want to work with you maybe, what would be the best way for them to connect with you?
Follow me on Instagram. Best place. It's at dr.adrian.chavez, and I'm sure you'll put a link in the show notes. But definitely follow me there because that's where I do most of my teaching, and then you can find out about any programs or any kind of one work I do. But I do more teaching than any.
Cut out right when you could just go back and I'll just pick right back up. I'm sorry, my internet must be not great
Yeah.
right now.
So you want me to just say on Instagram?
Yeah, I'll just say, Adrian, if folks want to follow you or work with you, where can they find you?
So the best place to find me is on Instagram. My Instagram handle is at dr period Adrian period Chavez. I'm sure you'll link it in the show notes. But that's the best place to find me. I do a lot of teaching there. I occasionally will promote like courses and things like that that I also offer. But my favorite thing to do is really teach on various topics. So that is where I do it the most.
Ah, awesome. So, Adrian, before we wrap things up, I ask one final question that I love to ask to everyone. And it's basically if you could go back in time to when you first started, it could either be when you first started university, it could be when you first started working with people, and you could give yourself a little bit of advice or a little piece of advice. What do you think that would be?
Um, I think when I first started working with people, I would have probably, given myself advice to be more compassionate. I think because early on, I was mid 20s. I was a dad and everything like that, but in my mind, I was like, you just got to work harder and try harder and do the things that I'm asking. And over time, I've learned to be more understanding of different circumstances, like we've talked about, like people's dog dies and they're not focused on nutrition for a couple of weeks, and that's reality. And as a younger individual, you don't really have that perspective going into it. And oftentimes I would um when I used to first started working with people, I would be more I had higher expectations of, do it no matter what. And now I've kind of learned that, this is something that, as I mentioned, this is a lifelong thing, and there's no rush for someone to like make all the changes, today or in this 3 months that they work with me or whatever the case may be, and focus more on educating and helping people to understand, how to make things work within those challenges, and not necessarily like you have to adjust your life to for nutrition. Now I realize that like this is something secondary that needs to be, you know, you need to pay attention to it, but it's not going to be a priority all the time, and it doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be like the first thing that you're thinking about. It's a problem if it actually is. If all you think about is your nutrition and that consumes you, even when things are going, where your focus needs to be elsewhere, it's on nutrition. That can be more problematic than anything. So I think that piece of wisdom would have probably helped me make better, interact with people better early on. But something that you kind of only get through the experience. So I'm not sure that I would have even listened to it at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot of people when I ask this question, they have the same thought. It's like, I don't know if I would have taken this advice, but it's something that you can't really change your past, but it is nice to be able to reflect and be like, "Oh yeah, this is what I've gained along the way." Like it's good that I can reflect on this now and know this. And someone's probably hearing you and it's probably what they need to hear too. So I can appreciate it for those many different reasons. So, if folks are listening to this podcast for the first time, I really appreciate you being here and giving it a listen. If you could leave a 5-star review, write a review if you're listening on iTunes, that's a great way to get this podcast in other people's ears. And if you're here for the first time because you're a big fan of Adrian, I really appreciate it. And you can go back and listen to some of the other interviews I've done, other episodes. There are mini episodes where I break down some common questions I get from coaching clients, and you might find it pretty helpful. Adrian, thank you again for being here. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. And I hope everyone has a great day and you go do amazing things because you can.